All right, I'm going to get started in a second here, so if you've just come in, try and quietly find and quickly a place to sit. You're going to want something that you can write with. Doesn't have to, it can just be a scrap of paper, it doesn't matter. Okay, we're going to start with a game. I'm going to show you a series of images on the screen, and I want you to tell me whether or not you see play in the image. So I'll just call out yes if you see play, and no if you don't. But also, as you go through and look at the images and you're kind of getting your answer out, just jot down a word or two quickly, maybe 3 words. That express what it is made you think you saw play or you didn't see play. It might be the environment in the image. It might be the expression on the person's face. It might be whether or not there's a person in the picture. Anything, just whatever it is that made you think you saw play or you didn't. All right? So here we go. I'll put each one up for a few seconds so you can kind of take a look and get an answer. So yes if you see play, no if you don't see play. Play or no play? All right, so write down a couple words that made you say that, whatever it is you said. All right. Play? Okay, write something down. Play? Anybody say no? Okay. Play? All right. Write something down. A few words. Yes? You sure? Yes. Can't hardly hear you. All right. Here comes a tricky one. Play? Huh? Some say yes. There's one yes I heard. Okay. Write down what you're thinking. All right. Play or no play? I can't hear you. You're not saying anything. Yes or no? Or you can say, I don't know. Yes? Let me hear yes. Yes. There's a yes. Okay, thank you. All right. Play or no play? That was quick. Play or no play? Looks like fun. All right. Ready for the next one? Play or no play? Okay. Play or no play? All right, write something down. Obviously, you can't get these wrong. Or maybe not, obviously. All right, this one is really going to be tricky, but it's also cool as hell. Play or no play? No play. All right. Play or no play? Who says yes? Say yes. Play? Okay. Play or no play? No? Okay. Look carefully. You don't want to miss anything. All right, there's just one more. Play or no play? Okay. All right. Good. We'll come back to that a little bit later, or another version of it. Thank you for playing. Now, think for a minute of all the ways that we use the word play in daily life, as a noun and a verb, formally and informally, in many different, otherwise unrelated contexts. We use it literally and figuratively. You could probably think of many more expressions that illustrate different meanings of the word play. But you might have a hard time coming up with a definition. You might say there is a lot of play in the way we use the word play, which is, by the way, a play on words. Just looking at the sheer number and variety of synonyms for play can give you a sense of the range of meanings of the word. So now I want you to think of the concept of play as a geographical territory. All right, the concept is a territory, and I want you to view its combination of everyday pervasiveness, that we use it all the time, and the variety of meanings as an invitation to wander into that territory and to explore it. In fact, I'm going to make you play another game. So close your eyes. So every week I notice that when I ask you to close your eyes, there are some people who just are absolutely resistant to closing their eyes. I don't want to traumatize you, so if you absolutely can't, don't. But I promise you it will be easier and more interesting if you do, and I swear nobody is going to hurt you. So please close your eyes. Now imagine you're entering this conceptual terrain of play. It's your imagination. So you can have it be a big city, a glacier or a desert or a forest, a mountain or a valley, the bottom of the sea, or even a different planet. You can even combine them. Anything you want. But wherever you are, wherever you've put yourself in your imagination, imagine that you've never been here before. So you're in this terrain like a visitor, a traveler, a foreigner. Think for a moment now about what your purpose might be. Are you there because you want to experience something different? Are you there because I've commanded you to go there? Do you want to know more about the territory to understand it? If so, is that because you want to tell others about it, or just for your own sake, because you're curious? Maybe you want to be able to do business there one day, and you think you might be more effective if you know something about the place. Without judging whatever your answer was, just think honestly about why you're here, about your intention. Okay, now, imagine that as you're moving slowly through this territory that you've chosen, you encounter some surprising variation, something unexpected that complicates your experience. Depending on the space you're in, the variation could take many forms. In a city, it could be a back alley, or a sudden expanse of open space, or maybe a shadowy figure approaching you. In a forest, it might be a hidden path, or a deer bounding out from a tangle of underbrush, an opening in the canopy through which the light streams. Maybe the surprising trickle of a waterfall. In a glacier, you might encounter massive cracks through which you peer into icy black water, cracks you couldn't see from a distance. In a desert, shifting eddies of blowing sands, or elevated dunes, or the unexpected appearance of an oasis. And if you're underwater, maybe the gracefully shifting kaleidoscope of coral and exotic fish gives way to an apparently recent shipwreck. So just imagine whatever that variation is in your territory. Now take a moment to consider how you will approach that complicating variation. There is no right answer. Just visualize yourself. First, what do you feel? Fear? Expectation? Relief? Delight? Apprehension? Curiosity? Impatience? Maybe something else or some combination? Now, consider what you're thinking about what you've encountered. Does it seem important? Trivial? How do you classify it? Is it meaningful, or does it seem insignificant? Now, let yourself respond in your imagination to what you've encountered. What do you do? Do you move toward it? Do you explore it? Do you retreat and leave the territory entirely? Do you stay in the territory but try to find a way around or through the variation? Okay, you can open your eyes. Thank you for playing again. What we as students do when we enter a complex conceptual territory like play will depend a lot on what we want and what we feel we can afford. It will depend on our abilities, our resources, our interests, our purposes, and our current mood, including how playful we may be feeling. We are here, all of us, here today, in this big auditorium at the University of Michigan. You're here to get an education that you or someone has paid a lot of money for. And I'm getting paid to do my job by providing it. The work of research, teaching, and learning is work. It doesn't seem like there's much room for play in here, and we're not here to screw around. But maybe, even as we get some work done today, so that I can feel responsible, and you can feel like satisfied customers, so we can all feel hardworking, even as we think and talk seriously about play, maybe we can find some ways to be playful while we do it. So, I'm assuming you've done your work. I'm assuming that you value the money being spent for you to be here. Maybe you borrowed money to be here. Maybe your parents worked for it. Maybe you are working for it at a library or in a cafeteria, on an athletic team. Seconds, minutes, hours, days, months, even years of a life, yours or someone else's or both, have been literally transformed into the reality of you being here in this class, in this room. I'm assuming you value that. And so I'm assuming specifically that you've done the readings you were assigned to do before lecture today. Of course, I could be wrong, and maybe you haven't. But if you have, you may have realized a couple of things. First, that a lot of people who study sports study its relationship to play. And second, that they discuss, debate, and disagree about that relationship, in part because of what we've already just seen, that play itself is a very difficult thing to pin down. And then, when we consider that sports means a lot of different things in different contexts to different peoples, the complexity doubles at least. So it can seem that the whole enterprise seems impossible and maybe even pointless. But regardless of this real and potential confusion, certain ideas about play and its relationship to sport do crop up repeatedly. So without getting too serious about it, without imagining that we can arrive at a single, one-size-fits-all definition of play and account of the relationship of play to sports, we can at least gather together some of the features that pertain to a lot of the different things we think of as play. So in the article that you have, or if your discussion section is today, you will already have read for your first discussion section, the philosopher Randolph Fiesel sorts the different approaches to play into 5 categories according to how each of the approaches primarily characterize play. I'm going to walk you through these. After all, it's my job. Feazell begins by discussing those primarily scientific ways of thinking about play that center on it as an observable action, which we call behavior in the case of animals and activity in the case of human animals. There isn't a lot of concern in this domain with what play is, but there is a lot of puzzlement and speculation over why play happens. All agree that play, whether among human beings or other animals, serves no immediate purpose in relation to satisfying the material requirements for that creature's survival. It's purposeless. And this recognition of the purposelessness of play is a foundational staple of almost all theories of play. But I want you to see something important, and that is that it's not precisely right to say that play is purposeless. It just seems purposeless when purpose is defined to include nothing more than keeping the creature alive. And play doesn't seem to contribute to that. But a creature could have other purposes in playing, and it could be that we don't know what they are. Or it could be, as nearly all play theorists agree, that the purpose of play is play itself. There's a technical term for that. The technical term for an activity, the purpose of which is just the activity itself, is autotelic. It means, from Greek, end in itself. We can then distinguish autotelic activities from what we call instrumental activities. Activities which we undertake for some benefit that we'll enjoy later, after the activity is done, but as a result of the activity. Autotelicity forms the basis for most definitions of play, but it also raises new questions. So, for example, at least among human beings, the autotelicity of play raises the issue of what it means for us to choose to do something purposeless or autotelic. And this brings Feazell to the second set of approaches, those seeing play as distinguished by a particular motive or attitude or state or frame of mind. We could call that attitude playful, obviously, but that doesn't really tell us much. We want to know what sort of things go into a playful attitude that might lead us to engage voluntarily in an activity whose purpose lies entirely in the doing of it. So Feazell has done some of the legwork for us and reviewed a bunch of different responses to that question. And he concludes that all of this boils down to just three basic components, making up what philosophers call a lusory, not illusory, but a lusory attitude, just what we think of as playful. One of them is pleasure or enjoyment. The second is a recognition that what we are doing is in some way separate from real or ordinary life, and an attraction to the activity for its own sake. This lusory attitude need not be the only attitude we bring to play. This is very important. A lot of thinkers and students get stuck on this point. You can have mixed motives, okay? But if the lusory attitude is absent, then even if the activity might superficially or conventionally look like play, the individual engaged in it is not really playing. Okay? So in this room right now, we're all engaged in an instrumental activity. I don't think there's anybody here, I mean, it'd be awesome if there was, anybody who is here just for the sake of being here. Most of us are here for some other reason that some benefit we'll enjoy once we leave. Salary, a grade, a degree, the ability to do certain things in the world. But that doesn't mean, the fact that we have those other motives doesn't mean that we might not also have a lusory attitude in here. Hopefully we do. Then we're making it more like play. So Feazell next turns to those approaches that distinguish play from other activities by trying to isolate its unique form or structure. Now we're talking about the activity itself. The play of animals or babies or small children can often just appear to be spontaneous and unstructured. But much of what we conventionally think of as play, even among children, does have a formal structure. And that could be true among animals. I just don't know enough about them to say so. You can think of the structural components of play as that which sets it apart from other activities in our daily life. So the structuring components might be external. For example, dedicating a space like a playground, or a time like recess, or equipment like a toy to play. All of those might be structures that set play apart from the other activities of our daily lives. But we obviously do not need these things to be playing. Sometimes a simple statement expressing a shared intention, you be Batman and I'll be Robin, puts in place a play structure. That example sheds light on a dimension of play that becomes especially important when we consider games and sports. Structuring factors that are internal to the game and actually create it. So to play games or sports, participants agree upon a conventionally stipulated relationship between the defined goals and the set of means by which these goals can be achieved. One of the aspects of play, including games and sport, that distinguish them from ordinary life activities is that play requires us to forego the most efficient means of achieving a goal. I'm not allowed to club my opponent with a brick in a boxing match, even though that would be the most efficient way to knock him out. Or to sprint across the infield in a 200-meter race. Or to pick up my golf ball and drop it in the cup. Playing a game, writes philosopher of sports Bernard Suits, is the voluntary attempt to overcome unnecessary obstacles. All right, let's pause for a second. We can think of what we've done so far as approaching play from two sides. On the one hand, by asking if there is an attitude or motive that distinguishes people who are undertaking play from people who are not. And on the other hand, by asking if there is a structure that distinguishes play from other activities. But we can also ask about what arises when the two come together. We can ask about the actual experience of playing. In other words, now that we have the basic structure of play and a basic attitude leaning us to want to play, we can get the game in motion and see what we experience as we play. Here, the possibilities that Feazell reviews are extensive and varied. Among many others, and others that you could think of that he probably doesn't, we can find fun, absorption, diminished self-consciousness, loss of a sense of external time passing, the desire to continue, and the impulse to improvise. There's a lot of variety here. To make some sense of it, I usually think of all of this as ways of experiencing ourselves as free creatures. Though this freedom, I want to point out, emerges kind of paradoxically because we voluntarily submit to the conventional restrictions that define play as a structure. So, in the first place, of course, play is by definition voluntary, so just by the fact of playing, we have exercised a freedom. Second, by making this choice, we free ourselves from the obligations of daily life. Third, the absorbing tasks that are imposed by the unique structures of play that need to overcome unnecessary obstacles free us from what can be a worrisome and burdensome self-consciousness, and with this can free us from our usual awareness of the passage of time. And fifth, the unfolding dynamic variables of play free us from rigid mechanical responses and invite us to exercise our capacity to improvise. All right, so we've looked at play biologically as an autotelic activity. We've looked at it psychologically as a certain disposition or attitude. We've looked at play as a unique structure or form of activity. And we've looked at it as an opportunity to experience and express our human freedom. Lastly, Feazell describes approaches that see play as what he calls an ontologically distinctive phenomenon. This is a mouthful, and not a very enjoyable one. However, it might make more sense to you when you think of times that as a participant or spectator, you've been conscious of the importance of respecting the game. Where is the game? Where is that game that you think needs to be respected? Underlying that kind of expression is the idea that play exists, the game exists, in some sense, independently of the player or of any particular instance of play. So the way that I make sense of this idea is by comparing it to the way that language exists independently of anything I might say, or that air exists independently of my breathing it, or that a river exists independently of my stepping into it. When I think of it that way, I see play as a kind of flow of activity that I can step into, like a river or the ocean. And I see, moreover, that once I do so, it will begin to absorb me and invite me or challenge me to respond to its dynamics. In this view, play is to playing as life is to living. So maybe, as you were listening to me talk about play, you were thinking about which of those elements you've seen or experienced in sports, and which ones you haven't. Perhaps you were thinking of elements that exist in sports that do not exist in play, and even among these elements in sports, some that actually seem hostile to play. Maybe you were thinking about aspects of play that would get in the way of sports. There's little question that play has something to do with sports, but there is a lot of debate and discussion about how much, and even more about what role play should have in sport. So I'm going to introduce you to one of the first and most influential ways that someone tried to think about the relationship of play to sport. It is also, in my opinion, one of the most boring and least useful ways to think about that relationship. But, as I've said, it's my job to tell you about it, and your job to know about it. And anyway, it might lead us somewhere unexpectedly interesting. Professor Alan Gutman began by dividing play into spontaneous play and organized play. He called the latter games. Spontaneous play might just be running around the backyard or splashing someone with a hose when you're washing the car. Organized play has rules. But even though they have rules, as we've just seen, games like tag or hide and seek or cops and robbers are still play. Professor Gutman then proceeded to divide games or organized play into those which are non-competitive and those which are competitive. Competitive games he called contests. Leapfrog, though it has rules and so is a game, does not usually involve competition, keeping score, or winners and losers. Ping pong, though, or poker, both include not only rules, but also competition. So this left Professor Gutman with this Venn diagram to illustrate that not all games are contests and not all contests are games, but also that there is an overlapping subset of play activities which are both games and contests. So finally, in order to make distinctions within that overlapping area, Professor Gutman employed the distinction between mind and body that we discussed last week to separate intellectual contests, like poker or chess, from physical contests, like baseball or soccer. So, if we're following him in his thinking, we're going to conclude that sports are a physical form of organized competitive play. Professor Gutman's schema is super neat and very satisfying. Everyone who plays any sport is playing. and a bunch of people who are playing either spontaneously or non-competitively or intellectually are not playing a sport. To know which box to put something we see someone doing in, all we have to do is observe whether what they're doing meets 4 criteria: play, organized, competitive, and physical. Check, 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 check. It's a sport. Sweet. Looks like my work is done, but to be sure, let's test it out. I'm going to show you a video. It's about 2 minutes long.
We want you to feature an ingredient that's crunchy, a little watery, not a whole lot more to say about it. Celery it is. You need to feature the celery.
It needs to be the star.
It needs to be the star, that's right. 30 minutes on the clock, your time starts now. It. It was nice. Both really strong dishes.
Thank you.
Only one person's moving on. Sam's.
Awesome. Hey, man.
Maybe if Gerald hadn't cut his finger. So was that a sporting event? No, right? It's Top Chef. So I know you're going to say no. But let's look at Professor Gutman's schema again and work our way backward. We had a checklist, remember? So the two chefs use their bodies to gather ingredients, prepare them, and cook. So it's physical, undeniably physical. It is competitive. There's a winner and loser that will be decided by a judge. It's organized by rules that identify a goal, make a dish, and limit the means by forcing them to feature celery and to complete the dish within 30 minutes. And though the competitors are certainly on Top Chef to win the monetary grand prize, they are also obviously motivated by their love of cooking for the sake of cooking, and are also evidently absorbed enjoyably in the flow of the activity. So it is a form of play, certainly as much as any conventional mainstream professional sport. So maybe cooking should become an NCAA or Olympic sport. Just plain. So let's play with Professor Gutman's schema a little bit more to see how it works on activities that are closer to home. You're going to see a few more pictures now. This time I want you to just call out whether you see play only, sport only, or both in each one, okay? You can just say play, sport, both. But again, just jot down a few words as you go to describe and capture what it is you said and why, I mean. Sport, play, both? Both, okay. All right. Sport, play, both. Okay, got a little mixture here. That's good, interesting. Sport, play, both. Okay. Sorry, I should give you a second to write something down. All right, now, sport, play, or both? Okay, we're starting to lose sport here. Sport, play, or both? Okay, I didn't hear any sports there. So think about what you're seeing that's making you begin to judge what you're seeing in a certain way. Sport, play, both? Play. Thank you, whoever's shouting consistently. I appreciate that. All right, last one of these. Sport, play, or both? Okay. You sure? What if I say sport, play, both, or neither? Still play. Okay, cool. All right. So it can be easy to see how Professor Gutman's category of sports fails to include play activities that we think of as sport. But what about the flip side of that? Are there any sport activities that aren't play? Things that we would think of as sport, but not as play. Professor Gutman's schema assumes that all sport is play. Remember that. All right, so you don't have to close your eyes for this, but you do have to imagine. So imagine a very young, very poor boy in Argentina. Okay? Has few sources of pleasure outside of kicking a ball around on a muddy patch of ground near his home in the slums of Buenos Aires. Sometimes he can play with friends, most often by himself. It's the only thing he loves. His school is terrible, it's underfunded, and anyway, what's the point of going to school since there will be no opportunities for people from his background in his country? So he starts to skip school whenever he can get away with it, just to go kick the ball around. One day, an energetic and caring young teacher spots him on the field when he is supposed to be in school. He notices the boy's ability and his enjoyment, and, because he's caring, rather than reprimanding or punishing him, puts him in touch with a coach. The coach trains him and instills self-confidence in him. The boy joins a local team, catches the eyes of professional scouts who show him the possibility of actually earning a living, doing what he loves. Eventually, he earns a spot on a professional team. So now we have a soccer player. But now, imagine this. After a long, successful career, an unethical business manager swindles our hero out of all his career earnings so that he is left as poor as when he started. His body is wrecked from years of training and competition and stress. Now, nearing middle age, he finds the game has changed out from under him. However, he has the opportunity to sign one last short-term contract with a team looking for an aging veteran to help stabilize a young roster. He signs, but not because he still loves soccer. He just needs the money. And having devoted his life to soccer, he has no other way to get it. What would we say he is doing when he takes the field? He is clearly engaged in an organized physical contest. But it seems strange to say that he is playing, at least given the way we talked about play earlier. He may, in a strict sense of the term, still be freely choosing the activity. There is no gun to his head. But he's not engaged in the activity for its own sake. It may or may not absorb him, but he's certainly not enjoying it. So now we're in the odd position of saying that our hero is taking the field in a soccer game, but he is not playing soccer. That seems weird. And anyway, if we asked him, he'd probably admit that there are days, or maybe just moments, when it all comes back to him. Maybe when his knees don't hurt so much, and he forgets about his money and the problems, and he slips into the zone and into the flow of moving angles and trajectories and possibilities opening and closing, and he's just playing soccer again. Until, perhaps, a minute or two later, when once again he is not. Now, remember metacognition? Back in my first lecture, I told you that it was the ability to notice and think critically about the way we are thinking. And I said that in the humanities, part of what we do is reflect on what we're doing when we're studying something. I'm reminding you of it now because we're about to do it. When we classify the things of the world into categories, we are engaged in an intellectual activity, a form of thought known as taxonomy. Taxonomy is not just for academics, like Professor Gutman or myself. We all use taxonomy frequently in daily life to carve up and organize the reality of our experience in the world. Gasoline, regular or premium. Human beings, natives or foreigners. Institutions of higher education, research universities or liberal arts colleges or community colleges. We imagine that once we know which box a thing belongs to, we know what to expect of it and how to manage it. We literally could not even think or speak without utilizing this form of taxonomic thought to some degree. Much of the time it works, and so we keep doing it. But in the process of doing it so often and frequently, it becomes a habit, and pretty soon we forget we're doing it. We just think that reality is that way. Much of the time it works, but what about, this is the important part, the part of reality of life, of us, that taxonomies fail to track? The part that falls in between the cracks of boxes or leaks out of them, or simply bursts them entirely. If it's fair to say, as I did above, that what makes play meaningful as an experience in our lives is that it heightens and even allows us to exercise our sense of freedom and possibility, then it would seem to me that play would be a good thing to cultivate in life, in sport, and for that matter, here, in our ways of thinking. From that perspective, it strikes me as kind of unpleasantly ironic to be working so hard to construct a sort of conceptual zoo in the cages of which we can imprison an activity as either play or sport or both. By now, you may be feeling confused or frustrated. I know I am. And might be worse for you since you were only doing it because I made you. The whole enterprise makes me want freedom from the task. I want a way of thinking and talking about the topic that feels more flexible and adaptable, more fluid and dynamic and free, more like playing. So let's look at a video together. In 2015, the British graffiti artist known only as Banksy snuck into war-torn, poverty-stricken Gaza in Israeli-occupied Palestine to shoot a satirical commercial. He was inviting tourists to make Gaza their destination. A few weeks later, in response to Banksy's video, a group of Palestinian teenagers who call themselves PK Gaza filmed this and posted it to their YouTube account.
صباح الخير يا ولاد عمومنا تفضلوا شرفونا شو بتحب مضيفكم دم عربي ولا دموع من عيوننا بعتقد هيك تأملوا نستقبل من هيك تعقدوا لما تركموا على غلطة من
Yes, Banksy, Captain's Government State of Gaza. My name is Abdel Gassaf. Nearly 50% of us unemployed, and we are very available to show you around. Welcome to Gaza! I'm sure we can find a place for you to stay, but there are around 12,000 people here in Gaza needing homes and needing houses. But with no construction materials coming in, here in Gaza we can't reply. We have a lot of friends and neighbors around us, and they keep their eyes on us.
With this comes and goes, in Gaza we must be patient in everything. We can offer you bread and water, but actually most of the water here isn't green apple, and bottled water is too expensive. But we are happy to share with you.
We are here in the port, Sea of Gaza, There is a lot of people come here because the situation in Gaza is very difficult. They look at the sea, they want to go out, they want to see the world, we want to see the parkour teams, we want to see everything because we want to do a lot of things, you know, and we dreams a lot. Despite all of this happening in Gaza, we are here and alive and our spirit is very strong. So come and discover us and make Gaza your destination.
هيك لبسنا الكوفية لأننا وطنية الكوفية عربي من هيك لبسنا الكوفية هويتنا الأساسية الكوفية عربي يلا علي الكوفية علولي هالكوفية.
All right, so these kids, for those of you who don't know, are engaged in an activity called parkour, or free running as it's sometimes called. That's a more recent offshoot. Free running has been described as the practice of moving fluidly, efficiently, and creatively across an urban environment, or as the art of overcoming obstacles. It originated in the 80s in France, where some French teenagers adopted a military training technique called parkour or activity for their own leisure time recreation. It started to diffuse via social media, mass media. It appeared in commercials and movies. And local groups all over the world began to adapt it and create parkour or free running groups. I'm going to skip through to a couple things here, just because I know we're getting close to being out of time. It seems pretty clear that what PK Gaza and others practicing parkour and free running are doing is play. And some of you may already be considering whether or not what you've just seen should be a sport or be considered a sport. That's fine. I can understand that, and I don't want to suppress that impulse. But I want to encourage you to suspend it temporarily. Think instead, just as a hypothesis, that what PK Gaza and other kids around the world are doing is not only play, but an instance of sport. In fact, you could think of it as an instance of this. Action sports vary widely in the degree to which they incorporate competition. In the case of parkour, some of its pioneers have insisted that it be viewed as a physical and spiritual discipline in which competition has no place. But to say so, they usually say that the only competition is yourself. In any event, as the practice has been adapted by local youths around the world, both formal and informal competitions have begun to spring up. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with the X Games and have watched certain originally non-competitive action sports like snowboarding in the Olympics. One way to respond to this phenomena that avoids the frustrating and possibly fruitless attempt to decide once and for all whether it is or isn't a sport is to see it as an opportunity to expand our sense of what sports can be by consciously seeking to cultivate in the sports we play and watch those aspects of action sports that we find worthwhile but may be eclipsed by some of the components of the sports machine. The question, in other words, might not be, should these activities be considered part of the sports machine or not? And if so, where do we fit them in? The question might instead be, how can we make some of the experiences and values prominent in these activities a greater part of the activities that are already in the sports machine? How do we make the aspects of our humanity that we affirm when we are at play, especially the experience of our freedom and creativity, a greater part of our experience in the sports machine? This, I know, isn't a question that has a simple answer. At least I certainly don't have one. It doesn't lend itself to broad policy solutions or reforms. Instead, it challenges you to think and study and converse in an open-ended way. In the process, you'll encounter obstacles, maybe insoluble problems, disagreements, resistance from others, ignorance or inconsistencies in your own thinking. And there may be no payoff, no benefit that you can later derive when you're done exploring the question. So I'm just inviting you to take it up freely this week for its own sake and to allow yourself to be absorbed in and perhaps transformed by it. Hold on. It's 11:59. Anyway, it's okay. When you're done doing this, you can always just go back to work.